how quickly do you find yourself changing out exercise? Like obviously if it's progressing, you're going to keep it. But if it's, 1 week, 3 weeks, how long do you let it stall before you're like, okay, time to just eliminate this for a little while?
So, good question. I think it depends on the lift and how attached to it I am. So there'll be something like a squat. I kept squats in. I only took them out the last 2 months, but I kept a variant of squat since like 2017. I've had it in for the whole time, but I've changed it. So I changed it from like a controlled squat to a pause squat, and I had like a narrow stance squat. And each one I would always have in for at least 3 months or 3 mesocycles, so more like 15 weeks, up to probably like 6 mesocycles. So my straight leg deadlifts have been in for a long time now, but now they're starting to kind of stall. So generally, at least
Yeah.
3 months or 3 mesocycles up to six. For isolation movements, I probably vary those more frequently, but I almost think I shouldn't on some of them. I think it's just like a psychological boredom thing, and I rationalize that there's not so much
Yeah.
technique learning and things like this. But I particularly think for like my abs, and calves, I just want to commit to like one flexion machine or one extension machine and just be
Mhm.
like, just focus on that actually progressively
Yeah.
overloading, because I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, I definitely think ultimately if you're really gaining muscle, like there's a good discussion that's kind of happened in the last year or two, which is that, before it was always like you add more weight, that's how you progress. And now it's kind of shifted to more like, not that that's not true, but that maybe you're looking at the order wrong. Like you progress and that allows you to add more weight. Now the end result is the same, you're bigger and stronger, but it's interesting because it shows that it doesn't just come down to, well, just put more weight on the bar. Like maybe it's okay, how do I do that? How do I get to a point that I can actually do that? And so my first comment was going to be, I think if you've gained muscle and you have the same movement, you're going to be able to lift more weight. Like you just are. If you have, assuming most other factors are similar. But if you just stick with that same exercise forever, maybe that's not ideal to get that increase in muscle to then be able to. So I do think there's something to be said for saying like, okay, clearly I'm stalling out here. I need to do something different, whether that is just increasing the volume or changing the exercise, some sort of stimulus. I think it's a little too simplistic to just say, I'm just going to stay with the same exercise forever and progress with that. Obviously, that's not going to work.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think even from a point of, well, for longevity and health in terms of like joints and ligaments and hitting the same place over and over again, which is why I ended up moving to like I call it controlled high bar squat, just not really utilizing the stretch reflex at all because I started getting to a point where I was chasing numbers and I just end up bouncing and bounce like a trampoline out of the bottom, and I was like, I
Yep.
caused myself some knee and hip pain after a while. I was like, this is not, I can't keep doing this. This is not smart. And I see people doing it. And like for some people, their joints and tendons and ligaments can take a lot of beating. Mine actually can. I'm very fortunate in that way. Like I have big joints, which is sucks for bodybuilding, but in some ways it's kind of, I can take a beating and take decent hits of volume. But so longevity, and like we know for like to get the best results, a lot of the best bodybuilders are the ones who have been lifting the longest, and a lot of those are the smarter lifters because they've been doing it, lifting intelligently and not just kind of plowing themselves into the ground with certain movements. And then also just variation from like hitting muscles at different angles.
Right.
Not every single movement will kind of hit every single muscle fiber in the same way. So I definitely see that as kind of a strategy for going forward. And I think long term that definitely provide the best results. Short term, I think obviously, yeah, sticking with the same movement, getting used to it. But yeah, it's hard to kind of take it away from people. Sometimes they're like,
Yeah.
oh, I love this movement, I just want to keep doing it. But I think sometimes that just bites people in the ass.
Sure. Sure. You mentioned briefly there about doing something. I think you said like the psychological reason behind it, and I think I liked your post. I think a couple of days ago where you're talking about we're not a machine, and you kind of involve like the psychology. And I think there's a lot to be said that because people who are like us, who I mean, even for us, it's a factor, but we are very dedicated to it and very strict, and we can sometimes force ourselves to just continue to do something we might not want to do if it's going to provide the results. But as people who coach others, you have to realize that, it's like, do you want to be right or do you want to get the results? And you can say, hey, you have to do this. This is the best way. But for a lot of people, that's not going to work. I mean, even for sometimes something as basic as like macros, right? I mean, if somebody comes to me, they've literally never tracked in their life, they're 30 pounds overweight and they're like, I'm just trying to get in shape. I'm not going to start them most likely with like, hey, here's your plan, log everything, like all the time. You have to follow these exact macros. I mean, I could, and some people would follow that, and they'll be, they have that initial motivation. They might follow that, but for a lot of people, that's not the best way, in my opinion, at least, to just like right out the gate have them doing that. So I was going to ask you, what examples do you have where you've done something for the psychological benefit, or just you thought psychologically is what you wanted to do, even though you knew for yourself or for a client, it wasn't the best physiological thing to do?
Fantastic. So yeah, I think I think it has a lot of practical helpfulness to just take out psychology and just look on paper what's optimal. But I think, like I said in the post, you have to remember we aren't machines, even though we want to like behave and treat ourselves like machines. And I think, like you said, you probably treat yourself a bit like that, and I definitely treat myself a lot like that. So for myself, I very rarely, at least I try not to. I don't think I do. I might just be ignorant to it. Like let myself do something that is kind of just my preference because I want to do it that way. Maybe sometimes I could be like I convince myself that it's not me being lazy, it's them overthinking it. Like I could do things like this. I probably need someone to assess what I'm doing and like really take a bird's eye view. But I guess one indication of that would have been with Jared when I said I was going to mini cut and he was like, you shouldn't. So then I kind of didn't allow myself to go with what I wanted to do, and I went with what was probably right on paper. So I don't often find myself letting myself do it. And I think probably sometimes I'd be in a better position if I did. But with clients, I definitely have actually someone who recently signed up. He's been with me for a few months now, and he came from like a background of like JP, Jordan Peters kind of training very high intensities, low. Actually, he didn't train low volume. He was quite high volume, high intensities, take everything to failure, and kind of very against kind of gaining body weight and body fat and bit kind of adipose phobia. So yeah, with him, I just transitioned it. So it was a case of, typically with a client who is bought into what we do at Revive Stronger, and they understand the process and they kind of know what they're going to get before they even see the program, I can start them at like 3 to 4 reps in reserve, minimum effective volume, and they're cool. But for someone like him, if I started him at 3 to 4 reps in reserve, he would have literally, I know he just would have spat it back out and been like, no way. So I tried to do like a 2 reps in reserve for the first mesocycle, and then we'd like progress from 2 to 2 to 1 to 1 to 0, and then like a failure week. And it's just, I just know the ability to progress through that and add volume is just difficult with that sort of system. It doesn't leave as much room for progression, I don't feel. So in the next mesocycle was then, can we start this at like 3 to 2? So then we tried that. And he was like, you wrote 3 to 2, but I didn't take anything to 3. So it was like at 2. So at the moment, we're still starting mesocycles at 2 reps in reserve, which is much better than where he was taking everything to all out failure every week. So whilst he knows that isn't the best for him necessarily on paper physiologically, psychologically, it's what he is kind of having to do to be able to enjoy training. And he wouldn't do any training if he couldn't do that. So yeah, that's definitely an example where I've had to come to terms with people's preferences rather than like what I think they should be doing.
Right.